Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you about today is how GameStop migrated 12 e-commerce sites and a loyalty platform from kind of a mixture of on-prem and managed dedicated hardware to the cloud in about 3 months, and then realized we'd gotten most of it wrong and spent the next 6 months fixing a lot of that stuff. So I'm Rob Burke and I run international multi-channel for GameStop, and I'm based in Dublin, as you can probably tell, hopefully tell. So what we do, okay, for GameStop International, we run 12 e-commerce sites. We've got about 15 million loyalty customers, and then we're connected to about 2,500 stores across Europe and Canada for web and store and click and collect. So web and store is, hey, we don't have that in stock, but let us know, we'll ship it to your house. And click and collect is, pre-order it online or collect it online and go and get it in your local store. So where we were, we had managed hosting. Managed is a very loose term, on a private cloud with a kind of maybe legacy provider. And we also had some co-located self-managed hardware that we owned. And I suppose our problem with this was fixed costs, fixed terms, and protracted renewals. So we refreshed everything or renewed everything on a kind of 2 or 3 year cycle, which is obviously painful when your business is changing all the time and when your demand, when your customers change frequently. What this led to was a static and over-provisioned infrastructure where we had, it's retail, and I'll talk about kind of retail scale in a second, but we had to have everything in place for 3 years for our worst day or our busiest day across that 3 year cycle, which is obviously a pain in terms of guessing and getting everything set up. We did have the ability to scale, obviously within those 3 years, upwards, of course. We couldn't really reduce the cost in any way, but there was a long lead time for that as well. It wasn't just a case of clicking new instance or deploying some infrastructure. So I mentioned retail scale. These are GameStop's more or less real numbers in that, Q4, which for us is November, December, January, is pretty much twice as big as any other quarter. So Q4 is usually somewhere between $3 and $4 billion, and that's usually twice as big as any other quarter. Within that, you've got Black Friday and the holidays. So we talk about Q4, but really we're talking about like a 6-week period. And even within that, we're really talking about a 3-week period. And within that, we're talking about a day or a number of days where things go crazy. And then you've got those 2,500 stores or 2,500 sites, and that's just for GameStop International. For GameStop here in the US, we've got another 5,000 or 6,000 stores to worry about. The challenge with Black Friday and with the holidays and stuff is you either need to provision twice as much infrastructure as you need for the entire rest of the year, or you need to figure out a way to get your infrastructure to do twice as much work for 1 quarter or for 1 day. This is really problematic. This is really tough. In our stores, we can hire more people. We can hire people for 3 months or for 10 weeks or whatever we need them for. But with our infrastructure, that's really a challenge, especially when you're working with providers who, just can't spin up infrastructure that quickly for you. Or if they can, it's pretty expensive. Or if you're using your own gear, where do you get that? Where do you get it for 3 months, and what do you do with it for the rest of the year? Beyond mine for Bitcoins or something. So what were our challenges? We had an opaque environment. We didn't really know what was going on. That a lot of it was managed. For virtual machines or for operating system instances, yeah, we had admin. We could manage those boxes. But when you're working with a managed environment, which I'm sure many of you have, you don't necessarily have full access to your firewalls, to your switches, to your routers, because they're managed on your behalf by your partner or by your provider. And that's a pain. And even when you do have your own managed, or even when you have your own gear co-located, it can be a challenge just obviously getting access to it and managing it all the way you want. So an extension of this is not having as much control as you might think you do. Obviously you can ring your managed provider, or you can get on the phone with them or send them an email and say, hey, change this firewall rule, or reconfigure our load balancing. But you can't do it yourself. And when you are experiencing an issue, or when you just want to experiment with something, that can be a real lag. That can be a real kind of time delay in how you do those things. You've got a super protracted design, quote, build cycle, So you're working with a provider who, hopefully is being helpful or hopefully understands what you're trying to do, but it still takes a long time to design that new environment, to get quoted, because remember, you're signing an agreement for at best 12 months, but more likely 24 months or 36 months. And then building it takes time. Getting that infrastructure in place, getting it available to when you can use it, to when you can run your workload on it, that takes a lot of time. You've got those high fixed costs. When you do make that agreement, or when you finally go through that design, quote, and build process, you've got an invoice that's going to come in for the same amount every month for the next 36 months. And going back to our previous example, that can either be an environment that can handle your busiest day, or it can be an environment that can handle most of your days, but it's rarely both. And then for us, this isn't a byproduct of managed hosting. This is more just some internal challenges we had. We had limited disaster recovery capabilities. Some of it comes back to cost, some of it comes back to bang for buck, some of it comes back to just how organically a lot of this platform grew. But the reality was that for us, we had limited DR capabilities, and getting sufficient DR capabilities in place on a managed provider, or even with co-located hardware, can be challenging, or was challenging for us. When you speak to people, or when you speak to enterprises, and this really is about kind of big enterprises, and you ask them why did they eventually move to the cloud, or why did they migrate to the cloud, it's usually due to some compelling events. Something happened. Because all of this other stuff, all of those challenges that you might experience day in, day out, just kind of becomes like the weather over time. You tend, it's not actively frustrating you. It's some passive background noise, it's a pain in the ass, but it's not actively saying, I have to change everything. So what were our compelling events? Black Friday 2014. We had a 6.5 hour outage right in the middle of the day in Europe, where most of our customers are, or most of the customers that use this platform are. Everything looked fine. Application servers looked good, web servers looked good, database looked good, firewalls looked good, load balancer looked good, everything looked fine. Everything that we could see looked fine, everything that we could control looked fine. We were on the phone with our provider all day long. There's a bridge open, we're trying to figure it out, and we're getting bounced from tier 4 networking to tier 4 load balancers to tier 4 firewalls, and you're getting bounced across the globe. It's a real pain. We did eventually figure it out. It was to do with some active intrusion detection we were doing in a firewall that just couldn't handle the throughput. But by the time we got there, like I said, we'd lost 6.5 hours of revenue on Black Friday. Let me tell you that a quarter of one day's SLA was not worth what those 6.5 hours were worth. So following on from that, so that was Black Friday, so that's November 2014. We had a managed hosting renewal due in summer 15, and we had our data center equipment refresh due in September 15. So we had both of those coming together within about a 3-month window for the first time ever, because they'd been on 2-year, 3-year cycles, so they just happened to coincide. So we'd had this big, massive problem on Black Friday where we really felt we hadn't gotten the service we wanted, we hadn't gotten the support we wanted, and we felt that if we had more visibility and more control, we could have resolved that issue quicker, because nobody cared about it more than we did. And then we had both of these renewals coming up in summer 15, or towards the end of summer 15. So we decided, okay, let's migrate to the cloud. So let's get out of here. So what were our goals? Migrate to the cloud, and then do it now. That was really what we were looking at. We had a huge workload to move. We had a huge environment to move. We had a lot of customers that we were serving, and we had to do it right now, or we had to do it really quickly. I don't know about your companies, but in a company like GameStop, 6 months tends to feel like right now. So anyone who's done any work in kind of business school, or at any point, any goal setting session, you've probably evaluated whether or not your goals are SMART. So are they specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and do they have a timeline around them? So were we specific? Yes, we wanted to migrate to the cloud. Was it measurable? Yes. Are we on the cloud? Was it achievable? Well, we've heard Amazon runs in the cloud, and they trying to do something similar. Is it realistic? Well, the cloud is real. And what was our time frame? Yesterday. So this is what we were facing, or this is what we wanted to do. we knew it was kind of a long shot, or we felt it was a long shot, given how much we had to move, given the fact we had to rebuild 2,500 VPN tunnels, given the fact that we had 15 million loyalty customers that were checking balances all day, every day, given the fact that we had 12 production e-commerce sites. And when those sites are down, they're not earning money. So we knew it was a challenge. Okay, we had a fallback in that, yeah, we have a current environment that we could probably keep running on, but those negotiations probably would have been fun. So that's what we set out to do. So this all kind of happened around the very beginning of 2015. So we decided in February 2015, let's do this. Let's get this done. We're going to migrate to the cloud, and we kind of have a deadline of end of summer, because that's when our existing environment is going to be out of contract, and we're either going to have to pay month to month, or it's going to disappear, or whatever. So by April 2015, we'd selected a vendor. It's not really a secret. We did choose AWS. We chose Amazon, but this isn't about AWS. This isn't about Amazon. This is supposed to be more generic, more abstract for anybody who wants to move a workload from on-prem or managed hosting to the cloud. So you'll hear some Amazon terminology slip in, but it really is supposed to be more abstract. By May 2015, we had hands-on, as in we had an environment. Now, again, to a lot of people, they're like, why does that take so long? AWS.Amazon.com, new account, credit card, done. But again, when you take that whole sort of enterprise tax into account, you've got master services agreements, you've got contracts, you've got legal reviews, you've got all those bits and pieces that are in the way of you just going AWS.Amazon.com, new account. So by May 2015, we had hands-on. We had an AWS account that we could log into, that we could provision infrastructure in, that we could build things in. In June 2015, we got all of our networking, security, and high availability stuff done, which was, this was a huge piece of work, because, and in many ways, this is probably one of the more challenging pieces of work. My group specifically, we were, I manage software development teams. I take care of them. We can run our application anywhere. You give it's an ASP.NET application. It's serious ASP.NET applications, but you give us an IS box, we can run it on it. For the networking guys, they were used to working with Cisco gear, with F5 load balancers, with all of these bits and pieces that are pretty vendor specific. Some of these guys and girls had left school and they had never worked on anything but Cisco gear. And so they had to figure out how security groups work. They had to figure out how all of these concepts migrated to the cloud, or migrated to AWS in this example. So that was what we got done in June. July, we got our instances and applications running. So we brought all of our applications to the cloud, we tested them, we load tested them, we got it running, and it more or less worked. And then in August, we migrated e-commerce. So we migrated it away from the managed hosts, we redeployed the applications, we put the existing sites into read-only mode, we migrated the databases, we updated DNS, we were running in the cloud, we were running on Amazon. Goal achieved, problem solved. So in September, we did loyalty. So we migrated our loyalty platform from Colo, much the same type of story. What we had working in our advantage here is that, most people in Ireland tend to be asleep at a certain time. Most people in Canada tend to be asleep at a certain time. So we were able to do those migrations without too much drama when it came to the actual migration. So we were kind of sitting there in September thinking, okay, we're in the cloud now. Great. Everything will be perfect. All of our problems are solved. We are now in the cloud. And what we had described this as was a lift and shift approach. So we were going to lift all of our existing applications, databases, workloads. We were going to lift them out of managed colo or managed hardware, and we were going to shift them up to the cloud. And that would be success. And what that ended up looking like to us was we spin up instances for database servers. We spin up instances for services and caching layers and all of these things. We spin up instances for web servers. We spin up instances for load balancers, because in the cloud, everything is software. So we didn't have F5 appliances anymore. We had instances that ran load balancers. We spin up instances and then we kind of took a breath and we said, hold on. All we've done is gotten out of the business of having long protracted contract renewals and gotten ourselves into the business of spinning up instances for everything. Everything we wanted to do started with a new EC2 instance and then deploying some sort of software or taking an AMI out of the AWS catalog and standing that up. And when we compared that to our initial challenges, that didn't really look like success to us. So our first challenge was we had an opaque environment. And now we kind of felt like, well, we don't really understand that much more about this. We just have a bunch of instances. We just have a bunch of virtual machines running things that, okay, we can have more access to, but does this really simplify anything? Or does this really give us more clarity into what we're doing, into what our environment's doing? Management, no control. Well, we control the instances. So we can, we'll give ourselves a green tick there. We've achieved what we set out to do from that perspective. Protracted design, quote, build. Now things were quick to build, for sure. If someone said, I want 10 new instances, we could give them 10 new instances like that, no problem. The problem was, you were doing it every single time. You're going into the console, hitting new instance, or new whatever, you were maybe scripting out, spinning up 10 or 20 or 30 instances at a time, but it wasn't really solving the problem. What we kind of realized was, it wasn't actually the protracted quoting process that was bugging us, it was the fact that every time we were trying to do something, we had to do it ourselves. Every time we wanted a service to scale or to expand, we had to do it ourselves. Now the fact that in our previous environment, that was through a protracted kind of, hey, I need 10 new servers process, that wasn't actually the problem. The problem was we had to do it at all. The problem was we had to do it by ourselves, and it wasn't just happening for us. High fixed costs, so we replaced them with high variable costs, which wasn't actually that much of a win when we really looked at it. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later when we talk about managing expectations. But at some point in our internal conversation, there'd been this confusion between moving our costs from fixed to variable, being translated to we're going to reduce all our costs. And that wasn't really what was happening. Maybe at some point that had been the intention, but it wasn't really what was happening. And we had limited disaster recovery in the past. Okay, this we kind of gave ourselves a green check mark on. In that now we could tolerate a single availability zone or a single physical data center disappearing. We were fault tolerant within a region. So we couldn't really do much if Dublin disappeared, but a single data center within Dublin, okay, we could tolerate that. Now, if Dublin disappears as a city, I probably won't care about these websites, but that's beside the point. So we took a step back again and tried to figure out, what are we really trying to do? We were saying, okay, we said these were our main challenges, but what were we, as an enterprise who wanted to move to the cloud, what were we really trying to do? What were we really trying to solve? And so what we came to was this kind of set of fundamentals, or these success criteria here. So we said, okay, we want to improve our speed to market. We want to improve our value delivery. We don't want to have to spend weeks and weeks and weeks trying to get infrastructure in place just to do a proof of concept for some new business request or some new application or whatever it might be. We want easier access to variable costs, and we want to leverage that variability. So we don't just want the costs to be variable, but we want to be able to manipulate them in line with our business. So if we see something that's generating a lot of money, we can invest in that infrastructure. If we see something that isn't generating a lot of money, we don't want to spend that much money on that infrastructure. We don't want it to be sitting around. We wanted to improve our high availability and disaster recovery capabilities. Okay. And then we figured out what we were really looking to do. We wanted to blur that line between infrastructure and engineering. So call it DevOps, call it whatever you want. We wanted to blur that line. We wanted these two groups to be able to work more collaboratively, to be able to work together, to be able to understand what they were trying to achieve, and ideally do all this while eliminating work on both sides. So automation, being able to automate more, being able to get things out of the way. So we evolved. We said, okay, this isn't really what we wanted to do. So what do we need to do? Remember, we're in September, October 2015 here. We're in the cloud, but we're actually not all that happy. We still have a lot of the same challenges. What's going on? So November 2015, we have Black Friday. It was a resounding success. It was marvelous, especially compared to November 2014, where we had uptime of 75%. So okay, November 2015. It was a much less stressful Black Friday in that we were able to provision all the infrastructure we wanted manually, but we were able to get it there. We had everything. It was fantastic. There was the latent stress of, well, this is our first Black Friday in the cloud, but apart from that, we were pretty happy, and it went really well. We set records for GameStop on all fronts, not least of which was availability. So then in March 2016, so there's a big gap there, and the reason for that big gap is kind of related to that short graph I showed earlier. When you're making, double any other quarter's revenue, and when those 3 months are that important, you don't tend to change all that much. You tend to try and get yourself set up by September, October, and then you just don't touch anything until January, provided everything's working. But we did work all winter. We worked all winter at how can we make this entire environment, how can we automate more, how can we really leverage being in the cloud, how can we leverage the tools that this makes available to us. So by March 2016, we had a deployable environment. And what I mean by that is our infrastructure had mostly become code. When we wanted to spin up a new environment for dev or for QA or for whatever, we didn't do it by logging into the AWS console and hitting new instance a bunch of times. And we didn't even do it by running a script on some developer or some infrastructure engineer's machine that deployed 15 instances or 150 instances. We did it the same way we deploy applications. We did it through our build process. We checked it out at GitHub. We deployed it, it went through Jenkins, it went through TeamCity, and infrastructure appeared at the end of this pipeline. By April 2016, we deprecated our F5 appliance instances. So this was a huge win for us because, again, we had F5s. We'd always used F5s. GameStop uses F5s for everything. GameStop uses F5s for things you should never have used a load balancer for, but we did. So when we moved to the cloud, it was okay, well, we have F5s, we need to find a way to replace F5s. And sure enough, Big IP has F5 instances that you can spin up and pay a lot of money for, and they give you all the capability of an F5. But as we really looked at it, well, what are we doing here? We're doing some redirects, we're doing load balancing, obviously, and we're doing some SSL termination. Well, that sure sounds like stuff that we can either refactor out of the application, or we can, so that we can use ELBs, or use load balances as a service. Get out of it. It's more instances we don't have to manage. ELBs have their downsides, but in general, the less we have to manage, the better. And then by May, finally, we had auto-scaling in place. So we were auto-scaling regularly. So for us, this meant, okay, we'd been in the cloud since August for ecom, September for loyalty. So 9 months later, we were actually beginning to realize some of the fruits that we had sold people internally, that we had sold ourselves on. We were beginning to realize some of the fruits of all that work 9 months later. So the headline is, okay, we went to the cloud in 3 months. And then the subtitle is, it took us 3 times longer than that to actually figure it out. And we still haven't totally figured it out. But it looks a lot closer now than it did back in August to what we thought it would be. So we reevaluated success at this point. Okay, our opaque environment. Well, now our entire environment's in GitHub. You can code review our environment if you want. Well, you can't, but people inside GameStop can. So our entire environment is written there. It's written there in text. It's ready to be spun up. Management, no control. Well, now we have confident control of our environment because we understand the services we're using. We understand the places where we are still using software applications running in EC2 versus the places we're using services from Amazon's catalog or X as a service. Okay, protracted design, quote, build. Now things are quick to build and they're deployed automatically. All our deploys are automatic now. High fixed costs. Our costs still haven't gone down all that much. And in some ways you could argue that we've just moved the goalposts on ourselves. It has not actually gotten all that much cheaper. What we do believe, either because it's true or because we've convinced ourselves, is that we're getting much better bang for the buck now. We're still spending a bunch of money on this infrastructure, but we feel we're spending it in the right places. We feel that we're getting a lot more bang for every dollar that we spend in the cloud. And we can tie our spending much closer to our revenues. Now that's not to say that our AWS bill is going to be $100 a month, and then for Q4 it's going to be $200 a month. Not to that level. There is a certain fixed cost in just having the environment there, but we feel that we can scale it much more appropriately in response to the demands of our business and our partners. Our disaster recovery story, we've actually downgraded ourselves on. So this was one of our green points at the beginning, and we said, okay, well, it's great. Now we can survive losing an availability zone. We can survive losing a physical data center. It's not ours, but we can survive losing it. But as we thought more about that, we kind of got to the point of saying, well, if we can survive losing an AZ, surely we can survive losing a region. So, Amazon has 3 AZs in Dublin. What if Dublin disappears entirely? Again, I won't care, but why should we accept that limitation? So we've downgraded ourselves in that, and what we're working on at the moment is tolerance across regions. So we could say, okay, Dublin can disappear entirely, we'll survive in Germany, or we'll survive in US East, or whatever. One of the big caveats there, for us anyway, is those 2,500 stores, and the fact that they're out there and we need to deal with them. So how did we do this? What worked for us, and what do we think will work for similar enterprises? Places where change is difficult, places where there may be a lot of lock-in to specific vendors or specific technologies. How do we think other companies can make this work? And some of this is stuff that we believe we've discovered or learned ourselves, and some of it is bits that we learned from other enterprises. Places as diverse as John Deere. We spent so much time learning from those guys because they've done phenomenal work. I didn't really know you needed that much cloud computing to build tractors, but you really do. So process was a huge one for us. We changed our process in terms of how we did this, how we approached everything that we do. We now go cloud first or cloud native wherever possible. Now, that's a bit unintuitive because how does that get you to the cloud? And again, this is our personal lesson, or this is the lesson from our enterprise. We lifted and shifted to the cloud. That's relatively straightforward. But to iterate on that and to evolve from that and to really begin taking advantage of what is offered out there, we've had to shift our thinking to going cloud first or cloud native wherever possible or wherever sensible. So for us, this means if we need a key value store, we're not going to start up a bunch of EC2 instances, get them in a cluster, and get Redis on them. We're going to take a look at what's out there. What key value store as a service is there? If we need load balancers, we're not going to deploy F5 instances or run HA proxy. We're going to try and take it as a service. It won't always work. Sometimes you will need to spin up instances, spin up metal, or not metal, but you're going to need to spin up instances and deploy some software to them, deploy some application to them. But go cloud first or cloud native wherever it's sensible. Actively break your legacy routines. So again, for us, this meant breaking all of those assumptions. We use F5s. We use Cisco firewalls. We use dead letter queues, whatever it is. Actively break those routines for everything. And whether this is a period of 3 months, whether it's an ongoing thing, but actively question everything that you do just because it's the way you did it before. Because the way you did it before was in a different environment. It was in an environment where infrastructure took a long time to spin up, where everything took longer, where you didn't have as much control, where you didn't have as much flexibility, you didn't have as many options. So question all of those things. Take a new approach for your infrastructure teams. Now, software engineering teams all use whatever methodology makes sense to them. Agile-ish, Scrum, Kanban, whatever. But a lot of infrastructure teams that we've come across, that I've come across, inside and outside of GameStop, in any sort of enterprise, take a more waterfall approach, if you were to describe it from a software engineering perspective. There's a big old plan, and you've got to work through it step by step by step by step by step, and there's no value until the very end. And that can be really challenging when you're trying to move really quickly, where you're trying to make your infrastructure automated, where you're trying to be able to deploy it, where you're trying to be able to make it really transparent. That can be a huge problem because nothing exists until the very end. So, and this only worked because our infrastructure group and the leaders within that group were really open-minded. And as we worked closer together on this whole cloud project, they kind of got interested in the way some of our work got done, in the way some of our software engineering got done. And that open mind helped. They tried Agile for a while. They kind of eventually settled on a weird Kanban hybrid type thing. But they have a process now. They have an approach that works for them, that lets them deliver value piece by piece, that lets them deliver value in an iterative nature, and really works for them in terms of building infrastructure the same way we've built code. And then, okay, infrastructure code engineers love this. The great part about infrastructure being code is for application developers, it really simplifies things. They can take a look at it and understand what's going on. They understand that the artifact at the end of this being run or this being executed or this being built, okay, it's not going to be a binary, it's not going to be a deployed application, but it's going to be infrastructure that you can use to achieve a task. And by having all that there, by having that in source control in the same, it's all in GitHub, the same places that their applications are, they're able to understand that. They're able to take a look into it. If they see a queue can't talk to an application, they can find out why. They can dig in and find out why. And they don't need access to the AWS console. They don't need to go in there. They can just review how it was built. They can tweak it if they want, and they can redeploy it. They can deploy it as many times as they like, see the changes. So we changed a bunch of our processes. Know your infrastructure. Know what you're actually trying to migrate. Know what you're actually trying to improve upon. And this sounds kind of self-explanatory, but if your companies or anything like ours was, you get to a point after several years or decades of working on something, and nobody's even fully sure what's there anymore. You know, everyone's heard the apocryphal story of the server in the closet, but the real world example of that is you know, there's an API out there that one business unit uses once a month, and nobody else really knows they use, but it's there. There's servers, you know, if you're deploying instances in dozens or hundreds, sometimes things get missed, you know. So inventory everything. This is a horrendously painful exercise. Like engineers, network people, nobody enjoyed this process. And being perfectly honest, we did it once to kind of take a stock check of what we had, and we haven't kept it up to date. Now the nice part is we don't need to keep it up to date, because if we ever need to know what's out there, we can just review our infrastructure that's code. If we wanted to, we could just destroy everything and build it all up again. So at the beginning, you do need to inventory everything. You need to know what you're going to move. You need to know where it is, what it does, who uses it. We brought a big name consultancy firm in to help us with this. Maybe you can do it yourself. Maybe you need some sort of help. I'm not sure. It was a horrendous process, but it has to be done. It wouldn't have worked without it. And then profile everything, especially the hard stuff, the really hard stuff. For us, okay, so we're doing e-commerce applications, we're doing loyalty, a loyalty platform, loyalty applications. So the obvious things to profile are, you know, page load times, service response times, database response times. They're all fine. You know, we have those. We have those going back years. What we didn't have was like, how quickly does our network attached storage serve images? You know, how quickly do our database replications actually take from one cluster to another? You know, we know they're always right within about 15 minutes, but what is it actually? What is actually the threshold? What are they actually working in? And the reason for this is because when you do get to the cloud or when you do migrate, you're going to get those anecdotal, hey, this feels slower, or hey, this I thought this used to be faster. Usually by executives who seem to have stopwatches in their brains and know how fast everything takes. But you're going to get that. And the only way you can solve that problem, or the only way you can respond to that, is either saying, no, it's just as fast as the old environment, and here's all the data. It's not to say it shouldn't be faster, or we couldn't make it faster, but there definitely hasn't been a regression. So you need to know those numbers. So profile everything you can think to profile. And then understand the quirks and edge cases. So this kind of comes back to inventory everything, but it's one thing to know that a service is there. It's another thing to know some of the edge cases or quirks to do with that service. The one that stands out for me on this for us was we had an API gateway layer thing that sat in front of one specific API that when it was built, the engineer that built it just had a real quick, hey, I can save myself some typing if I just do a switch out in the country code. So it always looked for GameStop dot, and then whatever the country code was. So for Ireland, that's IE, for Germany, that's Germany, D. For Italy, that's .it. Except in Canada, we operate as EB Games. We don't operate as GameStop in Canada. So when we just kind of looked at this gateway and said, we don't still need that, we can just bring it across. We can do something different over here. What we didn't know was that gateway had an if statement in it that said, if the country code is Canada, don't look for GameStop.countrycode, go to ebgames.countrycode. And that bit us, and that caused some downtime for a certain service that Canadian stores depended on, and that was a pain, and it took us a while to figure out. And it caught us because we didn't understand the quirks in the educational environment. Because the engineer who built it had left, been replaced 3 or 4 times. You know, it's that type of story. It happens, and you know, if you have really up-to-date documentation and you have really up-to-date inventory management, you have really up-to-date asset lists, maybe you don't need to do some of this. I've yet to meet a company that is 100% on top of that stuff, so you probably do. Next up was question everything. So why do we do it this way? Well, again, we did it, you know, because the person who trained me into my job, they did it this way. And why did they do it that way? Because the person trained them in, and why did they do it that way? Well, they were a sociopath. So it can really depend, you know. So much of what we do, especially in a big company, can be just because it's always been that way. Why do we do it that way? Because we did it this way yesterday. Why did we do it yesterday? Because we did it that way the day before. We use F5s for everything. Why do we do it this way? Should we keep doing it this way? So, you know, ideally, If we were kind of, and this ties into the next piece, what would be the best way to do it? If we were presented with this problem again, remember the problem is not implement an F5 load balancer. The problem is distribute load between our backend servers, okay? The problem is not restrict that, or the problem is not write a Cisco ACL firewall rule to restrict access to this on these ports. The problem is restrict access to this backend service, to these ports, to these clients. So, what would be the best way to do it? You know, given what we have available to us right now, what would be the best way to do it? Balance that positive change versus scope creep. So you may find lots of things you could do differently, but differently doesn't mean better. So this is the kind of counterbalance to the other points. Find out why you're doing things a certain way, figure out if that's still the right way to do it or not, but don't change for the sake of change, okay? If what you're doing is working, if there's a solid reason for it, it's not gonna cause an immense management workload for wherever your new place is, keep doing it that way, that's fine. But if there's a better option out there, explore it. Educate your partners. So whether that's internal partners, external partners, whatever it may be, here's what we're doing and here's why we're doing it. So, okay, we're gonna move to the cloud. Why? We're gonna get variable costs. We're gonna be able to scale in response to our customer demand. We're going to be able to manage things better. We're gonna get out of this 3-year renewal cycle. Here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it. A lot of that is informative. A lot of that is just to keep people on your side, to, you know, not cause any massive questions or whatever it might be, so that there's no, you know, people don't really like change. So let them know why things are changing. This is where it's really important. Here's what we might need from you, okay? If it is truly just someone who needs an FYI, okay, tell them what's going on, tell them you're gonna do it. But if you're gonna need something from them, then you really need to engage with that person. You know, if you're gonna need that person to approve your new environment so that you can do pen tests, so that you can go live with it. If you need that person to set up 2,500 new VPN tunnels from stores back. If you need that person to approve a contract, approve a master services agreement with a new vendor that covers the entire world. If you're going to need that person to do something, you need to let them know as soon as possible. The tighter your timeline is, the earlier you need to let them know. So if you decide to do something that's really ambitious and it's going to take you 2 months, your engineers will figure it out. Your networking people will figure it out. Go and talk to legal. Go and talk to those places that are going to take a bit longer. And let them know what other groups like theirs are doing. Okay, so this is where it's kind of like, you know, why should that be my job? Well, because if your job is to bring a workload to the cloud, then the more engaged you can get these partners, the more engaged you can get these people who you're going to depend on to do your job, the better you're going to be able to do your job. So it becomes your job to go and find other enterprises that have done this, to go and find other companies, other teams, whoever that have done this. You can do that at conferences, you can do that on Twitter, you can do that in open source, you can do it whatever. And it takes a lot of begging and you end up owing a lot of people beers. But the net result is you get someone who doesn't believe you because you're just an application engineering manager, you're a director or whatever. They don't care what you say, but they really care about this girl in this other company who got rid of all their Cisco gear and now they're doing security groups in AWS and it works perfectly. They will listen to that person. So find other groups that are doing, you know, especially the vendor-centric groups. So if someone is used to working in Cisco their entire life, or to an F5 load balances their entire life, or they're always used to using, I don't know, Windows Server 2008, and now you're going to give them 2012, show them how this will work for them. Show them that it's not going to be that bad, it will all be okay. Manage expectations. So this is coming back to the invoicing stuff. In blue, you see our invoice for our managed environment, $1,000 a month, every month, no problem, no questions. Everyone's happy. That's what we agreed to 36 months ago, that's what it's been. Has its problems, but it's definitely not a problem when it comes time to get the invoices approved and paid. Then you move to the cloud in August, and suddenly your invoices start going, well, initially up, but then down, but they change, okay? They change, and that's what spooks people. Why is it changing? Why is this getting more expensive? Why is this getting less expensive? The direction of change is almost less important than the change itself. So this becomes a part of, okay, things are going to get more expensive, things are going to improve, costs are going to go up, costs are going to go down. You need to be able to explain why. If you keep track of that somewhere, great. If you're going to need to review those invoices every month, great. But you need to manage those expectations. Okay, go native. Go native in the cloud as quickly as you can. So this comes back to the other point we made about why do we do things a certain way? Can we go native? Can we bring this natively? Do you add any value by managing this service, by managing this whatever it is, load balancer, message queuing, email, whatever it may be? Opportunities are endless. Be judicious with them, okay? For us, we had a bunch of instances running Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch was then available as a service. We didn't add any value by managing, securing, patching these instances. Get rid of them, take Elasticsearch as a service. ELBs, you might have picked up that I really don't like F5s. We managed to get out of the business of running ELB, or running F5s, replace them with ELBs. We had to make some changes to our application, we had to make some changes to our networking and SSL, but we saved a bunch of money. SQL still runs on EC2 because Amazon's managed database just isn't there yet for us. How? Okay, that's a recap. Sorry, I'm a bit tight for time. Your decision checklist, okay, this is what might be important to you. Are we migrating or re-implementing? Are you going to lift and shift, or are you just going to re-implement everything in the cloud, go native from the beginning? Both are fine, know what you're doing. Are we bringing everything together or piece by piece? Okay, are you bringing an entire workload? Are you just going to bring the API that returns search results? Are you just going to bring user registration? Figure out what you're doing. Again, both are fine. If you can bring them separately, fantastic. If you have to bring it all together, know how to do that. Who owns this? Is this a service or a collaboration? Who owns your cloud? Who owns that piece of your infrastructure? Is this a service that your infrastructure team are providing to your application teams, or is this a collaboration between the two? Is this DevOps? The sooner you answer that question, the less nonsense there'll be, and the better your teams are going to be able to work together and get things done. Do we need help? If so, what kind of help? Whether it's inventorying things, whether it's pen testing, whether it's just figuring out how to actually move. How do you actually move a database in real time? How do you do all that stuff? Figure out what kind of help you need, figure out where your weak spots are, and go and get that help. Whether it's from a big four consulting company, or whether it's from two guys down the road who did a startup and it was amazing. Let's figure it out. And what is success? What's your definition of success? We thought we succeeded after 3 months. We really hadn't, because we didn't really know what we were trying to do. So if you can, as early as possible, define what success means to you. It might be you change your DNS records to Amazon records, great. That might not really be it, or it might be your first autoscale event, or it might be your first lower invoice. Whatever it is for you, define that success and then go get it. And thank you. And sorry I went over.